Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm under strict instructions. After my performance at breakfast, I have to read my speech. There's no ad-libbing. Yeah, thank you. So, you've had a big 2.5 days, and the good news is I'm last. This is the last speech that you get after a massive download for the last 2.5 days. I'd like to talk about our path to prosperity. So, formally, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to MLA's annual general meeting for 2017. Meat and Livestock Australia exists to foster the prosperity of the red meat industry, and that's our reason for being. That means our research and marketing need to deliver real outcomes for the industry. Outcomes that grow demand for Australian beef, lamb and goat in both our domestic and global markets. Outcomes that ramp up the productivity and global competitiveness of our farms, our feedlot and processing sectors. And outcomes that grow the sustainability of our industry through consumer research. Next year represents the halfway mark of the 5-year path to achieving the ambitious goals set out in your meat industry strategic plan known as MISP 2020. I'm pleased to report to you that MLA has been working hard to achieve the many key performance indicators set by you, the industry, in the meat industry strategic plan. And I draw your attention to the annual report that has 13 pages of KPIs that MLA has been asked to report on to industry. And it's in very, very small print too, might I add. It has the traffic light signals there as to where MLA is up to with each individual KPI. And there's lots of red in it. If it's ever all green, you need to ask some questions. But that's the level of transparency that we've aimed to achieve over the last 3 years. But to achieve these KPIs set out in the MISP 2020 and foster industry prosperity, MLA needs to be deliberate and targeted in our approach. So what will drive prosperity? We all know price is a key driver of consumer demand. And the story of manufacturing in Australia is littered with whole industries collapsing because they could not compete on price. Red meat processing energy costs have exploded in just a number of years. And along with the increased state and federal legislation, Australia is now one of the highest, if not the highest cost country in the world to process meat. Australia will never compete on price. So what will drive prosperity? Under industry guidance, MLA has actively marketed Australian red meat as high quality. And that's because it's true. Without a doubt, we deliver great tasting, healthy and nutritious product to the world. But we know we are no longer the only country or protein that uses the high quality marketing claim. It's no longer our point of difference. So we can't compete on price and we can't compete on quality alone. So what's our future? Put simply, and as you may have picked up from today's theme, it's the consumer. In our industry, the food industry, the consumer is king. And I take you to thinking about your on-farm production systems between closing the door, back door on that truck, and how long it takes for a rare or medium rare piece of meat to be served to a consumer. For our industry to continue to prosper, we need to maintain a razor-sharp understanding of our consumer, their expectations, their must-haves, their desires. From this understanding, we can deliver a product that stands head and shoulders above our competitors. That's how we drive prosperity. And of course, we must not for a second take our foot off the accelerator in delivering high quality, competitively priced, delicious product that has the food safety, welfare, provenance and traceability credentials. These are non-negotiables. But we have to deliver more than this, much more, and that's not easy. At last year's AGM, MLA announced a plan to fast-track the adoption of DEXA objective measurement technology as an enabler to value-based marketing. 12 months on, With that plan now adopted by industry, we are well on track to achieving the KPI set out in your meat industry strategic plan. That is, by 2030, 35% of the cattle and sheep supplied direct to works are paid on quality and yield. That's a customer-focused target. MLA makes no apologies for seeking to break through the barriers of inertia to deliver on the KPIs set by you, the industry. We are committed to ensuring that our producers understand the drivers of retail profit and how we can deliver on those drivers. Only this way can we move the Australian red meat industry from a commodity trader to a premium supplier. Australian red meat producers have a long history of understanding consumers. Think back over 15 years to those times when we listened to the consumer. In the 2000s, when foot and mouth disease and BSE made front page news, global consumers were calling for product traceability. Here in Australia, we were already rolling out traceability in the form of NLIS. In Australia, anthrax occurs every 3 to 4 years in Victoria. But thanks to industry's investment in NLIS and the identification of animals, the movement and sale of livestock can occur in these areas with ease during these outbreaks. Without NLIS, the beef industry would suffer a similar fate as the horse industry during the outbreak of equine influenza. Without NLIS, the livestock movements would stop, trade would cease, and so would farm incomes. Our industry integrity systems ensure we remain customer focused, and every member of our industry should vigorously defend them. Just keep in mind, as is happening at the moment, overseas customers, when I've visited them, religiously read Australia's online websites. Over the last couple of months, online comments by some of our industry have told global customers that Australian producers are opposed to just about everything, including our integrity systems, MSA and biosecurity plans. It is your industry, and the numbers in attendance do hearten me that are here at Alice Springs, but we cannot risk the majority being defeated by the minority who amazingly still question the value of our integrity systems, because it will have a long-term and negative impact on your industry. I regularly talk about the prime lamb industry as being the one industry of all industries in Australia, all industries, that has delivered year-on-year revenue and production growth. In fact, sheep meat production has increased 9% over the last 20 years, but value has increased fourfold to be worth $3.7 billion per annum today. Do we as an industry really want to jeopardise this value, by not addressing the risks to the industry and not having the hard conversations? Some months ago, I flagged the need for a whole-of-industry policy on mulesing. Because consumers do not differentiate between wool sheep and meat sheep. I know prime lamb producers would ask questions of MLA if the price of lambs fell because of negative consumer publicity, particularly when the first pillar of the current meat industry strategic plan relates to consumer and community support for our industry, its practices and its products. A well-communicated explanation of our animal welfare practices will ensure farms have the ability to manage fly strike in the future. The other approach, bullying media and producers who question the practice, will ultimately lead to a ban. For that reason, I welcome Sheep Producers Australia's recent statement that no prime lamb in Australia should be mulesed. By taking this stance, Australia's sheep meat industry is demonstrating that it understands consumers. This is also a sound strategy to manage risk in the event of a negative campaign about animal welfare. The fact is, we must remain on the front foot to protect our industry at all costs, even if that means having confronting conversations and making difficult decisions. We must learn from our mistakes, listen to our consumers and manage risk. If we only ever change because of a crisis or because we haven't identified or acted to mitigate a risk, all red meat producers can expect to receive negative commercial impacts at farm gate. MLA has never said ban mulesing. It has, however, called on industry to have a consumer strategy that informs consumers of the long-term benefits. As we know, once a negative story breaks and becomes a headline, a consumer has already made their mind up. And then you as an industry will then have to spend millions of dollars trying to convince or change a consumer's perception. The consumer is king. And as we have learnt in recent years, with countries banning hormonal growth hormones and Europe banning the castration of pigs, consumers change markets. Our consumers here and abroad want traceability. They want insights into your farming operations, and they want consistent eating quality. Meeting these consumer demands is far from quick and easy. It can cause discomfort and require all of us to change the way we do things. However, if we are to remain a consumer-focused industry and prosper into the future, we must recognise consumer demands early and then act to meet them. As I talk to global consumers, our industry's reputation is second to none, but we must be aware of changing consumer demands. Our global consumers are very different to you and I. Millennials want jobs that contribute to society, and as our future consumers, we cannot ignore their beliefs and values, particularly when it comes to food consumption. As an industry, we need to keep our eyes not only on the here and now, but also on the horizon. We've seen it with the likes of Uber and Airbnb, that's a new one, Airbnb, as we saw this morning with Anna from Auctions Plus. It's quite clear disruption can happen anywhere at any time. These innovations have disrupted long-established traditional industries. Uber and Airbnb are succeeding because they've relieved pain points that have existed for consumers for too long. In the meat industry, we're seeing signs of disruption too. The US online giant Amazon, as we also heard this morning, has just entered the food retailing sector with the $13.5 billion acquisition of Whole Foods. What does this acquisition mean? Well, doing things the way they've always been done will no longer fly. Amazon is known for its consumer centricity, its variety of products, low prices, fast delivery, and its love of innovation. It's also a data-driven company where consumers' purchasing data is mined to develop sophisticated algorithms to grow sales. Like Amazon, our industry needs to maintain a razor-sharp focus on the consumer. We need to provide relief from pain points. Staying on this path means we must remain nimble. We need to keep listening, mining insights, innovating and enhancing our product offering. Doing things the way we have always done, producing products we have always produced, takes us off the path to prosperity. This year, MLA has invested more in this area than ever before, with Natalie Isaac and her insights team delving deep into the minds of global consumers. MLA now has over 100 consumer data points from our major markets across the world. These insights aren't just nice to know. They are directly informing where MLA invests the marketing levy in our global markets. They help us customise marketing campaigns in different markets. They are also informing our exporters about the opportunities in different markets. Natalie and her team are no longer talking about understanding consumers. MLA have the data and the evidence to provide targeted consumer strategies for the whole of industry or individual levy payers. Like Amazon, we need to mine the data flowing through the value chain, ensuring that we are meeting market demand, getting feedback to keep lifting our game and getting paid accordingly. This is where the important work of the Integrity System Company comes in. This subsidiary of MLA, led by Dr. Jane Weatherly, is delivering our industry's digital value chain and the strategy that you saw this morning or this afternoon. The execution of this strategy will harness the power of the vast amount of data collected across the value chain. There will be continuous disruption to our industry supply chains, and we must embrace the change. So what are our consumers telling us? Well, there's an increasing amount of noise in our international markets and in the media about a product's environmental, sustainability and carbon footprint. While these are not key consumption drivers in our domestic market, there are global companies and protein processors investing big dollars right now in cultured beef, which is a meat grown in a laboratory using stem cells. Their motivation is to provide a beef product with a zero environmental impact that's more humane and antibiotic and waste-free. Investors include billionaire entrepreneur Richard Branson, who has joined Cargill, Bill Gates and other venture capitalists to raise $17 million to fund a project to produce this laboratory beef called Memphis meat. Richard Branson told Bloomberg News 3 months ago, "I believe that in 30 years or so we will no longer need to kill any animals, and that all meat will either be clean or plant-based, taste the same and also be much healthier for everybody." Then there's synthetic meat and companies like Impossible Foods, the Silicon Valley startup that's making advances in plant-based products that taste like meat, smell like meat and sizzle like meat. For more than 5 years, the researchers have been sourcing the exact ingredients from the plant kingdom to recreate the experience that meat lovers crave. Impossible Foods recently opened a processing plant in the US that produces 1 million burger patties a week to supply upscale restaurants across the country. Next on the cards is to tap into the vast retail grocery store market. Is this the start of a new era for meat production, where we will start seeing companies advertising their burgers as having no environmental footprint? In any business, you can ignore emerging issues such as these, wait for them to hit you, and then try and deal with them. Or you can heed the message and get ahead of the issue. As your industry service provider, MLA's job is to plan and act for today, tomorrow and beyond. Our job is to maintain the course on the path to prosperity. And that means looking ahead, understanding consumer concerns, desires and must-haves. The fact that this market signal in our high-value international markets are telling us that our carbon footprint and emissions from livestock production are an issue. As you heard from Lisa Sharp earlier, there is a global mega trend of increasing consumer interest in the provenance of their food. In Europe, there have been calls for carbon taxes on red meat. Remember, over 70% of our red meat ends up in global markets. These consumers are in nations that are banning petrol and diesel cars by 2040. There are other signals as well. Both sides of the federal parliament here in Australia have commitments to further reduce national carbon emissions by 2030 on a 2005 baseline. Nearly all state governments have set targets to be carbon neutral by 2050. Many agencies here and abroad continue to advocate the reduction of dietary meat intake in favour of increased grain or plant-based diets. Then add the fact that our industry has continued need to stay ahead of cost of production, international competitors, and innovation, and through innovation and other product differentiation. That includes countries like Brazil. So in June 2016, Brazil launched a carbon-neutral Brazilian beef brand, a joint venture initiative of the Farmers Union and government. We may think the world has gone mad, but clearly the drums are changing and they are beating very loud. There's even a story on the ABC today about the exact matter. The good news is that our Australian red meat industry has a good story to tell right now. In 2005, greenhouse gas emissions from the red meat industry comprised 20% of Australia's 600 million tonnes of total emissions. By 2015, Australia's red meat industry had reduced its emissions to 13% of Australia's total emissions. Some 70% of the abatement projects within the Australian Government's $2.5 billion emissions reduction fund are delivered on red meat properties, demonstrating the willingness of our industry to engage in the production of carbon credits and generating some $200 million plus per year of revenue for those businesses. Further demonstration of our industry's willingness to engage is that the beef industry, through the RMAC-led sustainability framework, has already signalled a commitment to reducing emissions by identifying and managing climate risk. Clearly, the red meat industry has done a lot of work and a lot of heavy lifting over the past 12 years, and that's good news. The better news is that we have an opportunity to create an even better story about our production in years ahead. With the right policy settings and a continued investment in research and development, and with an industry commitment to do so, MLA believes the Australian red meat industry can become carbon neutral by 2030. And we can be the first nation to do so. While this seems a giant leap, we've been making steady progress over the past decade. Now, new developments are identifying ways we can achieve this ambitious goal and put the Australian red meat industry head and shoulders above our competitors in our high-value international markets. Doing so will give our consumers even more confidence in our quality product. And in turn, the negative perceptions of red meat production that are peddled by our industry critics will be stifled by our positive position. To this end, MLA has started a project with CSIRO to identify how the red meat industry, farm and processing sector included, can become carbon neutral by 2030. A series of pathways have been identified that include both new innovations and farm management options, such as the extended use of legumes and dung beetles in pasture systems, savanna fire management in Northern Australia, sensible vegetation management, new feed supplements, genetic improvements, and even the possibility of a vaccine to reduce emissions, to reduce methane production in the rumen. These pathways do not require the heavy hand of regulation. What they do require is the commitment of industry, the right policy settings from federal and state governments, and a continued investment in research, development and adoption of innovation within our industry. Good science driven by profit and practicality will deliver many of the required outcomes to achieve neutrality. And all the evidence from our research state shows that whenever we have reduced methane emissions from our cattle and sheep, we've increased productivity. The dividends from setting a carbon neutral goal will include increased productivity to our industry, additional farm income from carbon mitigation projects, a major contribution to government targets on emissions and reductions, another strong assurance for consumers of the quality and integrity of our naturally produced, great-tasting Australian red meat. Now, surely that's got to be better than a laboratory beef lasagna or a vegan burger. With the consumer illustrating the path to prosperity, we must also continue to shift gears in producing more with less, while reducing our cost of production to ensure that we are globally competitive as possible. Yesterday on the producer tour and early today in his presentation, Sean Starling showed how MLA is investing in innovation to improve efficiency in the processing sector, on farm and right through the value chain. I must commend the number of processors who have been working with the Australian Meat Processing Corporation, MLA, to improve efficiency through both industry projects and their own investments through the MLA donor company. And you saw some of that in action today from Tom Maguire of Tees. With levy revenue trending down, MLA subsidiary company, MLA donor company, has been tasked with attracting more investors than ever before to dial up the rate of innovation in the industry by co-funding research and development that lifts the productivity and global competitiveness of the industry. This brings me to another important priority for MLA, that I want to report to you on today, and that is international trade and market access. Europe and the UK are some of the highest value markets in the world. The type of markets that reward quality, product integrity, and ethically and environmentally sustainable production systems. The type of markets where Australia's red meat is a natural choice. Now, for the first time in 40 years, Australia has an unprecedented opportunity to secure improved access into Europe through an ambitious free trade agreement. Negotiations for an FTA with the EU are expected to begin in the first quarter of next year. A two-way trade in goods between Australia and the EU is worth around $69 billion. However, Australia's red meat access to the EU captures only a minuscule component of this total value, less than 1%. This huge imbalance is due to long-standing measures placed on agricultural imports by the EU. In fact, we import twice the amount of pork from the EU than all the beef and sheep meat combined that we send to the EU. The EU's ongoing stance means our beef, sheep meat and goat will be some of the most sensitive items on the negotiating table. Realistically, absolute free trade with the EU is highly unlikely. However, MLA believes we should aim to secure the best market access arrangements possible, and our team have been working hard to that end over the course of this year. We still have a lot of work to do. It will be a big challenge. MLA, in collaboration with the industry task force led by Jason Strong, will continue to work very closely with the Australian government with one thing in mind. Whatever we negotiate now will define our red meat trade in the EU for many years to come. Finally, I would like to make some brief but important remarks regarding industry structure to put MLA's position on record. First, MLA support a review of the red meat Memorandum of Understanding. And given the current levy structure is approaching 20 years of age, MLA also support the whole of industry review of the current levy structure. It's in the whole of industry's best interest to initiate a review of our existing levy structure before an external body tells our industry how to move forward. MLA and AMPC are committed to a review, not just of the industry MOU, but the whole structure of the current levy system to ensure levy payers continue to receive the maximum benefit from global marketing, global representation, research and development. In closing, I trust that I have given you some further insight into how your MLA investment into research and marketing is delivering real outcomes for the industry. Outcomes that grow demand for Australian beef, goat and lamb in our domestic and international markets. Outcomes that ramp up the productivity and global competitiveness of our farm, feedlot and processing sector. And outcomes that grow the sustainability of our industry through consumer research. I add my appreciation to that of MLA's Chair, Dr. Michelle Allen, in thanking our Peak Industry Council and our levy payers. I also thank many of our research and marketing partners, and I thank MLA's excellent team of committed staff based throughout Australia and across our network of international offices. In the year ahead, we will continue to work hard to achieve the key performance indicators that industry has set in your red meat strategic plan. We'll keep the consumer as king in everything we do, and we will continue to work with you to foster the prosperity of the Australian red meat industry through to 2020 and beyond. Many thanks.